After nearly 7 years, we have Wallrunning in Apex, accessible to everybody. But you may not know that Respawn have actually added Wallrun to Apex in the past, and even scrapped a Legends rework that contains Wallrunning. Apex truly has a confusing history with Wallrunning, which starts off with Titanfall 3. Yes, when Apex was originally being developed, it was being made from the ground up as Titanfall 3 before it got turned into Apex, which meant in the very early days of Apex's development, it had Wallrunning, obviously, because it was going to be a Titanfall game, but also, it turns out pretty late into Apex's development, it maintains the Wallrunning mechanic, as in some of the early footage of Titanfall 3 Battle Royale / Apex, we don't really know what it was classed as at that point, we can actually see legends like Bangalore running across the walls, and this footage takes place at this area on Kings Canyon with Bangalore, so I would say this is definitely closer towards the end of Apex's development before it was released. Obviously though, by Apex's release, it did not have Wallrunning. It had plenty of traces of Wallrunning in the files, but this was never truly hinting at a future edition, it's just that Apex was built from the base of Titanfall. And to be honest, Apex's maps weren't really built for Wallrunning either. Seriously, try to find an area on Kings Canyon where you can get a proper Wallrun off. The thing is, Titanfall's maps were built for Wallrunning. Like, some areas were only accessible by Wallrunning, some areas were clearly made for Wallrunning flanks, but Apex's maps were never made with that in mind, so even if Respawn added Wallrunning post-launch, it wouldn't really be as effective or even as fun as in Titanfall. Especially combined with the fact that Titanfall pilots run way faster than Apex Legends. So naturally, if the Legends got Wallrunning, they would wallrun slower and it would just not really feel nice. This didn't stop people begging for Wallrunning, and guess what? The begging actually worked, because in Season 6, Respawn introduced a new Halloween LTM called Shadow Royale. And in this mode, whenever you died, you turned into a shadow form version of yourself. And you could only melee. The shadows didn't pick up weapons, they were basically like zombies. But to add a bit of power into the shadows, Respawn gave them a faster movement speed and also Wallrunning. For the first time ever, Wallrunning was in Apex, and it felt really good because naturally the shadows had a higher movement speed, which made Wallrunning feel super smooth and allowed for some crazy movement. People absolutely loved this, but unfortunately after this event ended, a developer squashed people's hopes for Wallrunning to become permanent. Daniel Z. Klein, quite an infamous developer at the time, replied to a post on Reddit talking about Wallrunning becoming a feature by saying, "I'd say it's very unlikely we'd ever put Wallrunning and double jumping on a full Legends." We're halfway there. We had a lot more leeway with shadows because they don't have guns and it's not important to chase them down because when you kill them, they just respawn. And then he talks about how Wallrunning in Apex and Titanfall are different, and if Apex had Wallrunning, it would cause more issues because people could more easily escape you and it could just add on to the confusion of the game. While in Titanfall 2, he talks about how the combat loop is different and also the arcadey aspect of the game makes Wallrunning suitable. And he summarized his post by saying, "Too long didn't read. Wallrunning and double jumping are sugar rush mechanics that are good in small doses in LTMs and in asymmetric combat situations, but it's unlikely they'll come to Apex properly." And you know what, at the time when he posted this was pretty fair. Apex did not have as many mechanics as it had today, and to be honest, if you knocked someone, there wasn't the constant chance that they'll teleport away to God knows where. Also, Apex is very different today in the fact that there are dedicated movement abilities like the Ash Dash, the Sparrow double jump, and much more. The game has definitely changed since he wrote this, but when he wrote it, it was pretty fair. So essentially, all hopes for Wallrunning and even double jumping were squashed. And after this, truthfully, for a long time, we didn't hear anything about Wallrunning. There were never any Legends leaks that included Wallrunning, and Respawn tended to stay away from movement a lot more than they do today, where movement has kind of become a core part of the game. But people were still hungry for Wallrunning. They were that hungry, they found out how to do it on Revenant. As the months and years and seasons went on though, Respawn started to reconsider Wallrunning and actually started to concept it as a Legend ability. But it would not be for a new Legend, it would be for an existing Legend, Revenant. Respawn clearly saw that people did enjoy movement on him and considered for his Revenant Reborn rework, they could add Wallrunning as a passive, along with several different abilities they were also experimenting with. So at some point during Revenant Reborn's development, probably around like season 15, Respawn gave him Wallrunning and started testing to see if it felt good. But there was one fundamental issue. It literally just didn't feel very good, and the maps were not built for the wall run either. It was said, while players would have loved wall running for Revenant, under rigorous testing the developers of Apex found the ability was far too situational, and specifically mentioned that the maps in Apex simply didn't allow for many wall running opportunities, the opposite to the Titanfall maps, where they were built for wall running. As a result, wall running was not consistently useful, and the idea of it was scrapped, along with other Revenant Reborn abilities like a 1v1 ultimate, where he could drag enemies into the void to 1v1 them, which would have been pretty cool. So then again, Respawn tried wall running, they really tried, but they had to scrap it. And when people heard about this being scrapped, their hopes for wall running in Apex were destroyed again. And for quite a few seasons, we kind of just had to accept that it would never come, which really sucked. But this actually all started to change very recently, when Respawn started leaning more into movement, and especially movement abilities in Apex. They started by giving Ash a dash ability, and then Sparrow got a double jump ability, which Respawn developers said originally probably wouldn't come, along with many more movement enhancing abilities. And people absolutely loved the new movement abilities. Maybe they didn't love the balancing of them so much, but they loved how they felt. And this newfound love for movement in Apex probably inspired the development of Wildcard a bit, because the new mode Wildcard, which just released, has a thing called Wildcards, and you can equip 3 of these Wildcards per match, and they give you unique passive abilities. And guess what? One of them is wall running, and one of them is dashing. So now wall running is in Apex and equipable to everybody. Is it actually good, or are the Apex maps not built for it? Well, let's start off with something very important. Wall running in Wildcard gives you a considerable speed boost, like a huge speed boost, to the point where it basically puts you on the level of pilot movement speed instead of legend movement speed. So I think the current wall running is a bit faster than if it would have been a legend ability. Second of all, back to the maps, Wildcard has loads of new walls around the map. If you haven't noticed around King's Canyon, there are just giant walls erected that weren't there before, and these work perfectly as cover, but also they work perfectly with wall running, and you can actually chain quite a few of these with wall runs. So there's two things about this new version of wall running: the maps are now more built for them, and they pretty much use pilot speed. And for the question if the wall run is actually good, yes, it is really good. There is one issue though: in areas where there's not a flat wall, you do really struggle to get a proper wall run. So I see why Respawn tested this ability for Revenant Reborn, and then we're like, yeah, this just isn't useful enough. It sucks, but it's the truth. Maybe one day Respawn could build a map up entirely for wall running, but I think because of the backlog of maps, it'll be quite impossible to get wall running as an actual legend ability. In Wildcard though, it's great, and they've modified the map to suit wall running, so I think it should stay in Wildcard. And maybe even Respawn should make like a Wildcard Titanfall LTM. And to be honest, players are massively enjoying this change, so hopefully Wildcards become a semi-permanent addition and come back pretty frequently, like the EPG. Still, should wall running become a legend ability? And subscribe to see the future of wall run.